Hey folks. Hey folks, Antonio Arellano here. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a really powerful conversation. A conversation that some people outside of Texas may be even curious as to why we're having, because they don't see the possibilities that we Texans see. A conversation about the future of Texas politics and the progressive side of Texas politics. Bold, fearless new leadership in Texas that is trying to revolutionize the way Texas politics is conducted and how we give back to our communities. To have this meaningful conversation, I am going to be joined today by two incredible representatives, Representative Ron Reynolds and Representative Jasmine Crockett, the chair and co-chair of the newly formed Texas Progressive Caucus. Jasmine, Representative Reynolds, how are you?
We're well.
Fantastic.
How are you?
It's great to be with you. I'm a big fan, and it's great to be on the platform with such a dynamic progressive leader like you and Vice Chair Crockett. So I'm excited. Looking forward to this conversation.
I agree. It's going to be a powerful conversation. And for those folks who are tuning in from wherever you are across the state or across the country, you're in for a treat. And let's dive right on in. The status of our state is really in jeopardy. There is so many attacks that are coming against communities of color right now in the middle of the redistricting process. In this past legislative session, we saw the Texas legislature conduct itself in a way that is really reprehensible, despicable, to target communities of color, to target the most vulnerable, to target trans children, to target so many of our community members that are just trying to get ahead and make a good living in the Lone Star State. Let me bring you in first, Chair Reynolds. Let's talk about what inspired you to build the Progressive Caucus in Texas.
Well, let me tell you that we were in the midst of some of the darkest days in the Texas legislature. I'm serving my sixth term. I've been in office for over 10 years. I'm serving my 11th year right now in the Texas House of Representatives, almost 11 and a half. I have seen an erosion of good public policy. I have seen, since the Trump era, I have seen voices of the progressives being trampled at the state level. I have saw a record number of people unemployed, that Black and brown communities, Black women leading the nation in maternal mortality, Texas leading the nation in the highest number of uninsured. We saw a erosion of good public policy. We saw the Trump era marshal in and eradicate the voices of the people. And so when we saw voter suppression, the most bedrock of our democracy is the fundamental precious right to vote. And when we saw Texas leading the country in the charge of voter suppression, and we didn't really have a progressive voice to counterbalance the far right, big live Donald Trump. We went to DC, Representative Crockett and I, and we saw bold, unapologetic progressive leadership from the House Progressive Caucus, leading the way on many issues like, common sense gun control, criminal justice reform under the George Floyd Act, climate change, equal pay for equal work, LGBTQ plus protections. And we knew that we needed to have that same cohesive progressive voice in this state that was unapologetic, that wasn't drowned out by even moderate Democrats, because all Democrats aren't fighting. All Democrats weren't willing to hold the line to stand for progressive values and against voter suppression. And so we came together and formed the Texas House Progressive Caucus so that we could be that bold, unapologetic, progressive voice in the state that was willing to speak truth to power to Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and the Republican leadership. And yes, even to our own Democratic colleagues that were willing to be more moderate or wasn't willing to be bold and audacious in speaking truth to power. So that is why we formed this House Progressive Caucus, to give that progressive voice a channel and a vehicle to speak unapologetically, where we didn't have to water it down and taper our message to accommodate and appease some of the other Democrats that weren't willing to be out front on those issues. So that is the reason why we did it. And we are so proud that we did it, because here we are today speaking with you and amplifying the voice of the people in this great state of Texas.
You're absolutely right. And I think that in particular, and the young voting bloc has been eager to see this type of leadership, this type of representation at the Texas House and the Texas Senate and the Texas legislature overall, to really understand and give a voice to people that want to see bold action out of Texas. Leadership that is fearless and is driving forward really revolutionary perspectives and ideas in a way that can transform Texas. Representative Crockett, let me bring you in. You're a freshman and you've been making waves at the Texas legislature. I'm so proud to be having this conversation with you. Talk to me about what this means to you, coming into this space and trying to course correct the legislator in a new direction.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks so much for having us. It's great to see you. And I think this conversation is extremely important. You're right. I walked into the legislature thinking that I had nothing but opportunities ahead of me. I thought, man, you know what? We're going to take these lemons that we've been given in the midst of COVID-19, in the midst of George Floyd, and we're going to turn those things into lemonade. This is finally our opportunity to expand upon healthcare access, because now we're in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and surely this is a time where we can argue for the expansion of healthcare access. In addition to that, we know that our jails have been overcrowded for so long. Our prisons have been overcrowded for so long. But when you're talking about social distancing and the risk that the state potentially is taking by having people that are incarcerated in the middle of a pandemic, and it's like we're locking up the guy that's accused of being in possession of a small amount of marijuana with the guy that's accused of, say, murder, right? Do we want to create more space for the guys that are accused of murder? Or do we want to go ahead and create more space for the guys that are accused of marijuana? And so when we're looking at being smart about how do we get through this pandemic, how do we bounce back, how do we come back and we come back better, I thought all the answers actually existed in the trials that were ahead of us. And so I saw nothing but opportunity. Sadly enough, our Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle saw opportunities as well. Opportunities to do nothing but take us down and go in the opposite direction of anything that made just common sense in the state of Texas. And so as a freshman, I walked in and I thought, man, what is going on? We're talking about giving everyone guns, even though we had El Paso and even though we lead in mass shootings in this country. This is what we decided to do in the first legislative session since the El Paso tragedy. We decided that we want to give everyone guns. I'm not really sure how that fixes a relevant problem that we have. We also ended up with Winter Storm Uri, in which we saw that our infrastructure was lacking when it came to the basics of keeping people warm in the middle of a winter storm. We couldn't do that very basic thing. And so we lost 700 lives. And you would think that, okay, well, this is an opportunity to make sure that we're going to work on the infrastructure. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about renewable energy. If we can focus on that, then we don't have to worry about the grid as much. We can actually make sure that we're decreasing the demand on the grid if we say, hey, give an incentive so that people are looking at having panels on their homes and actually making sure that they have their own energy. I just thought that we had all these opportunities. And instead, the Republicans took us back. They wanted to take us back 50 years when it came to voting. They wanted to take us back 50 or more years when it came to a woman's body. They wanted to take us back even further when it came to talking about what our history looked like and what history really is. And they decided that they wanted to not only rewrite it, but they wanted to whitewash it. And so sadly, I felt like I walked into an abusive relationship. I just wasn't used to being abused. And so to me, being a progressive is saying, hey, I'm not going to just let you beat up on me and I sit there and say that's okay because I don't have the numbers. It meant basically saying, you may beat me, but I'm going to land a few punches at the same time. And that's exactly what we're doing by having the Progressive Caucus, is we're making sure that we're lighting a fire and we're educating as many people as possible about what goes on under the pink dome, to the extent that people decide that they want to get involved. People decide that, you know what, it does matter if I get up and I go vote, because not every Democrat is created equally. It makes people say, you know what, we really do have fighters. We just got to make sure that we put them in position.
You're absolutely right. And the Republican Party seems hell-bent on taking Texas back. And what we're seeing here in the Progressive Caucus is a vision to move forward. Chairman, can you talk to me a little bit about what that plan looks like? What is the robust proposals that you think are possible in Texas?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that Texas is a majority minority state. When you look at the census and you look at the demographic shift in this state, it is led by Latinos. It is led overwhelmingly by Latinos, a coalition of Asians and African Americans. That is the new majority in this state. And when we come together and coalesce, because we have a lot of common interests when it comes to economic insecurities and food deserts and jobs and lack of access to health care and a history of discrimination. We have so many mutual interests. We have to understand that we have the ability to change the electorate in this state. Elections matter. And so one of the things that the Progressive Caucus is going to do is to reach out in these underserved communities to make sure that people are not just registered to vote, because we do a pretty decent job of registering, but to give people an incentive to vote, to give people articulate a message plain and simple, why elections matter. If you care about criminal justice reforms, the people who marched in record numbers during the pandemic after the brutal death of George Floyd, you want to see progressive changes with our criminal justice system. You want to see a livable wage of $15 an hour. You want to see where we can have climate change and have breathe clear air for our future. If you want to see these things and more, maternal mortality, you want to see so many issues that impact underserved communities, then you have to vote your values. And so one of the things that the Progressive Caucus is going to do is take this message across all 254 counties in this state and to work with other potential candidates that have a progressive voice to make sure that we're giving them a platform to get their message out there. And then that way we can build it from the ground up. We go as a grassroots organization to the communities to articulate the issues in a meaningful way. We don't mind going into the hood, into the barrio. We don't mind going into Black and brown communities to educate them on why elections matter. Not just presidential elections every 4 years, but local elections, electing city council members, electing county commissioners and judges. We don't have any more straight ticket voting in Texas. Unless we get federal law to overturn the voter suppression bill, we are making it more difficult to vote. So now is more important than ever that we get to the streets to educate people about what they need to go vote and why they need to vote. So the House Progressive Caucus is going to be articulating those issues in a crystal clear message, kitchen table. We're going to be bold and audacious so they don't have to no longer just look at what AOC is doing in New York or what someone else is doing in California or what someone else is doing in Florida or what other states. Right here in Texas, they will find those bold progressive voices, those ideas, and are advocating for Medicaid expansion, advocating for $15 minimum wage, those issues that have been lacking and put on the back burner. Those are going to be the front and center kitchen table issues that the House Progressive Caucus would not only be championing, but making sure that we elect candidates that have a similar views as we do, and that will be something that you'll be seeing in the very near future. So we're already formed, we're new, but we've hit the ground running, and we're going to be building from the ground up, and we are going to be coming to neighborhoods across this state very, very soon.
And that's exciting to hear. I know that we have over 20 members already in the caucus, and we're excited to see that expansion as public pressure continues to grow for more bold leadership. Let me just run off some numbers to the issues that you just highlighted, Representative Reynolds. Guns. The majority of Texas support reform such as red flag laws, background checks, limits on high capacity magazines. That's according to a Texas Tribune poll. Voting. The majority of Texans support automatic voter registration and same-day voter registration. That's another poll out of Texas that says that that's where the voters are in terms of climate. 63% of Texans think that the government should do more about climate change instead of running away from the conversation. And then abortion. 82% of people in Texas agree with some kind of legal abortion for women's reproductive systems. On that issue, Representative Crockett, you had quite a powerful message at the Women's March on October 2nd. You really shared a little bit about your mind and called Texans into action. Here's what you had to say.
Let's talk about a few things that the Republicans in this building claim they care about. Starting number one with freedom. They continue to say that we need to fight for the freedom as it relates to our bodies when they're talking about a man. When it comes to talking about a woman's body, they don't care about her freedom. Let's also talk about another thing that in this building. They talk about the Constitution and how much they love it. They love it so much that they gave guns to everyone in the state of Texas because they said it was their constitutional right. But when it comes to Roe v. Wade, comes to what we call Supreme Court precedents, we have found out that, number one, the Supreme Court doesn't care about our constitutional rights, nor do the people in this building. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is representation and why it matters. You see, the people that pushed this bill, while they put women out front, the people that pushed this bill and voted for this bill were old, white men. So what are they doing right now? Because I want to give you a charge. I don't want to just amp you up. We have work to do. And I need to make sure that you are ready to fight. We're in the middle of redistricting right now. You know what they want to do? They want to further limit your voice. The Texas Democrats went to D.C. because we love you. We are fighting for you. We wanted to make sure that everyone in this state had equal access to the ballot box. They don't want you to have access to the ballot box. They don't want to make sure that you're represented because they know that if you're represented, stupid laws like this would never be on the books. So I'm asking you, we need you. This is your charge. You need to testify against these terrible maps that they're trying to push on you to make sure that they can further limit your voice at the ballot box. It is time to show up and show out and vote these clowns out of office. Thank you, Austin.
That's incredible. I mean, and right, you hit the nail on the head. Representative Crockett, I want you to talk a little bit first about reproductive rights and the near abortion in Texas. And then if you could tell us a little bit more about the redistricting process.
Yeah, you got me a little emotional watching that. Did not know that was coming. It has been a fight. It's sad because I actually tell people that being a progressive in Texas is not spelled the same that is spelled in, say, New York or California. Sadly enough, in Texas, being a progressive means that I'm just trying to make sure that we don't get regressive policies, right? Like I can't even get to the progress side of things because we're so busy trying to make sure that rights that I thought were guaranteed by the time that I actually entered this earth, I thought they were already granted to me. We are replaying fights that those that died and fought before I ever was thought of, ended up fighting. And so as it relates to women's rights, it's not even a near total ban. It is a total ban. And that is what they've tried to do for years. They started off initially with their scalpel by saying, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to try to carve out a way to make sure that organizations that are providing for services for women are lacking in the financial resources that they need so that hopefully they will dry up and they will disappear. And what we saw was a number of clinics that provided more than just abortion access, but they provided overall women's healthcare access. And those clinics started to shut down, but there were still plenty that were thriving. So that wasn't good enough for them. And so honestly, I'm going to tell you that I don't believe that anybody on that Texas House floor that had anything to do with, or the Senate floor that had anything to do with this bill, because first of all, let me be clear, the majority of the time they don't write their own bills. I have actually drafted a number of my own bills where I actually wrote word for word what was in those bills. They actually have think tanks because they're robots, and they say, hey, these are all the bills we think that everybody in the country should introduce. And so Texas said, sure, why not? This is great stuff to run on. And so the bill author on the House side as well as the Senate side, they are both lawyers. So I'm like, you guys have to know that this is unconstitutional, right? Like, I get that maybe you don't want to turn on your lawyer hat, but like, you guys know this. You just want to be able to run and say, we tried and the courts messed us up. I think everyone was caught off guard when this law actually was allowed to go into effect. And once it was allowed to go into effect, the Republicans have now gotten bolder. But when you say it's a near total ban, it is an actual total ban. In fact, there's a recording of the governor that came out, I believe, yesterday, where he said, I have officially banned abortion in the state of Texas. That was an undercover recording that he was caught making that statement. And that was the point of it. It was to restrict it to the extent that it literally didn't exist. But let me be clear. Abortion isn't going anywhere. Abortion has been around since the beginning of time. What we have done is we have further put women that are in socioeconomically disadvantaged situations into a more compromising situation, as if they weren't already in a compromising situation because of all of the other barriers that they have. We've already talked about the maternal mortality rate. Let me be clear. Texas leads when it comes to African Americans in the maternal mortality rate. And we also lead in uninsured. Go figure. There's somewhat of a correlation. The party that claims to be pro-life is only pro-life so long as it's not actually determined to be a life, because they are saying that this is a heartbeat bill. It is not a heartbeat bill. And I appreciate Judge Pittman, who laid out the science. I know that some people want to ignore science and data, but the science is that Roe v. Wade is about a pre-viability abortion. What it means to not be viable, right, means that it's not a life. Okay, so it's been unfortunate that this is where we are, but I truly, I guess, I don't know, there's a part of me that just really wants to believe in the greater good and believe that at some point in time somebody will do what's right. Sadly, we had Judge Pittman who did what was right, and the Fifth Circuit swept in really quickly to make sure that they undid everything that he did in a well thought out, more than 100-page opinion. And so the Fifth Circuit, of course, did it with a one-pager, like, sorry, come back later. We'll talk about it when we figure out how we're going to justify what we just did, right? And then, the Supreme Court, they just said, oh, it's complex. Sorry, Supreme Court, you were supposed to be like the elite of the elite on complexities, right? So like, why is it that you are hiding behind, well, it's too hard, I don't want to do this right now, right? Like, it's absolutely unfathomable. But I truly still want to believe that we will get to the right place in history on this issue, and we will get back on track. But we need to expand the court.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the assault on reproductive rights in Texas is shameful. And we must all collectively speak out against it and continue until we repeal that law. Representative Crockett, in that video, you also spoke about representation, and you talked about the redistricting process. House District 100, which you represent, saw a 25% growth in African American population, also saw 50% growth in Hispanic population. How's that turning out for y'all? Are y'all getting more representation?
You're trying to be funny. No. So I will tell you that in the proposed map that came out of committee, they did just the opposite. They actually increased Anglo, the Anglo numbers to the extent that it's something that has never been seen in my House District, number one. Number two, they absolutely committed a violation of the Voting Rights Act, what is currently left of it. They violated within my district. I think I made it pretty clear, and my district was changed. So the African American numbers went up, my Latino numbers adjusted a little bit as well, and the Anglo numbers actually went down, which is actually more so mirroring what happened in Dallas County. So they changed it up. I am not happy with the map. I don't want anybody to be disillusioned. But they did make sure after I made a record, which is why it's really important that we are educated, because people kept thinking, why do y'all keep talking about race? Stop talking about race. Everything isn't race. Well, first of all, kind of, sort of it is. But we've got to get comfortable. We've got to get comfortable with talking about race and calling it out. You know, we know that 95% of the growth in this state was due to people of color. We ended up picking up seats in Congress because of the growth. Well, therefore, we should reward those that actually grew the state. But that's not how the Texas House nor the Texas Senate sees it. They see it as, well, you know what? We run everything. So we're just going to take the spoils of all your hard labor. That is what we've seen this entire session out of both chambers. So my district got fixed. Personally, I believe because I made a very solid record, and they know that I'm a lawyer, and they know that I was like, all right, I did my part, I'm out, right? Like, because I just knew that we would be okay. So my district was fixed, so to speak. So it's worked out, I guess.
Representative Reynolds, I want to bring you in on this redistricting conversation. Like Representative Crockett just pointed out, 95% of the population growth in Texas is people of color. And we need to make sure that our population is engaged in the redistricting process, because the Republicans are about to lock themselves in for another 10 years of power. Your take?
My take is the state of Texas. Representative Crockett just left a hearing before the redistricting committee, where Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was eloquently testifying before the committee, appealing to them to stop the racially discriminatory gerrymandering that paired her with the 18th congressional district and Congressman Al Green of the 9th congressional district out of the Houston area. Yeah. This is despite the fact that there was growth. In fact, both of their districts were above population, so they didn't have to take away or merge those two districts. That was an assault on the Black and brown communities that they represent. And so the example that Representative Crockett was talking about, this is the emboldened Republicans, because the Supreme Court has eviscerated a key provision of the Voting Rights Act that put Texas under preclearance, where they would have to get a court or the Department of Justice to approve the plan before it's implemented. So one of the reasons that we fought so hard as representatives, as Democrats, as progressives in DC, was because we knew not just the voter suppression, but we knew redistricting was upon us, and we needed federal oversight so that our Republican colleagues would not be so boldened that they would do what they did. They're able to do that theoretically right now because we lack some of those protections, and that's why we need federal intervention. We need Congress, specifically the U.S. Senate, to pass what's already been passed in the House, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the For the People Act, H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. We don't care what they call it. There's a new name that Manchin and some of them came up with, but the bottom line is they have to break the filibuster because the Republicans don't want to be statesmen. They don't want to do the right thing. The last time that the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, that Republicans passed it in the U.S. Senate 98-0. Now you can't find one Republican to say, okay, guess what, guys? This is bigger than politics. This is about the fundamental precious right to vote. Once before, and not so long in our history, people who looked like this panel, they weren't able to vote because of poll taxes and literacy tests. They weren't able to vote. It wasn't until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that we broke those barriers. I'm the first African-American since Reconstruction to be elected as state representative where I reside, but I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for the voting rights protections. And so that is why it's so key. If we don't get that fixed, then Republicans are going to continue to pack Black and brown communities so that they don't get a chance to expand, and they're going to crack. That means that they're going to put all the Blacks and browns in a few districts so that they can't be able to represent based on the numbers in the state. There's no reason why with the 95% population increase on Black and brown communities that we don't have two new congressional districts that have a opportunity to elect a Black or brown person. There is no reason, but yet it's still the two new congressional seats based on the numbers will likely elect an Anglo candidate. That is BS. And I'm going to call it for what it is. It's discriminatory. That's why we need people as representatives Representative Crockett said, to testify at these hearings, to make their voices heard, so we can build a solid record. Because guess what? We're going to end up in the courts. Every election cycle, Texas has been found to intentionally discriminate against Black and brown communities. And we need the U.S. Congress to enact this law now. Senator Manchin, I hope you're listening. Senator Sinema, I hope you're listening. I hope people in Arizona and West Virginia are holding them accountable, because this doesn't just impact Texas, but every state in the country. And so goes Texas. Other states already, just like the 6-week abortion ban. Guess what? If the Supreme Court says, okay, I guess that's okay, guess who's going to do it next? Other states are going to do it. So that's why it's so important that Texas, we combat these racially oppressive laws. These, not to mention critical race theory. We don't have to touch on that, but that was another BS law that was passed so that we wouldn't teach the history of racism and discrimination and slavery. We passed, we talked about the 6-week abortion ban, but we also passed a permitless carry. So instead of doing common sense gun reforms, like Representative Crockett said, Vice Chair Crockett said, we went above and beyond to say, you know what, we're going to have no gun reform. In fact, you don't even need a license anymore. You need a license to go vote, but you don't need a license to go get a gun. That is what we're seeing with the far right ring agenda of this state. So the progressives need to stand up. They need to vote their values. And just like you talk about those polls don't mean anything if people don't go vote. Governor Abbott is at a 41% approval rating, and it's going down. These mask mandates that he's fighting against, we're in a race to the bottom with COVID deaths. I mean, this is crazy. And so we need people that believe in science, that care about a woman's right to choose, that care about access to affordable health care, that care about livable wages and the clean air, that put people before politics. That's all we're asking for. And that is what we're going to continue to do. Demand that there is laws and policies in place that benefit the masses, not just the 3% or the 5% that far right that vote in Republican primaries, that believe in conspiracy theories, that don't believe in masks, that don't believe in vaccines, that are part of this assault on our democracy.
I believe that the road to a progressive America runs through the heart of the Lone Star State, and the demographic shift that we're currently seeing has some Republicans shaking in their boots. I want to give you both an opportunity for some closing remarks. Representative Crockett, you first. Talk to me. What do you say to folks that don't believe progressive politics can play in Texas?
Oh, I mean, that's just absolutely not true. If that were the case, they would not be fighting so hard to make sure that your voices are limited. So for so often, so long, so many people have said, my vote just doesn't matter. It doesn't count, but it really does. It's the only reason that they were putting out arrest warrants, which I should have had my arrest warrant, but it's back there. It's framed right there. I should have had my arrest warrant for y'all. But I mean, come on now. When have you seen anyone threatening to arrest lawmakers because they're not at their desk, right? That's how serious it was for them. That's how significant it was for them, is to actually say, hey, you know what? This is what we're going to do. We are going to arrest these lawmakers because we really need to hold on to power. And so I want you to show up and I want you to show out. And as I said in that video, it's time to vote these clowns out of office. But more importantly, know that there are people that feel you and are fighting for you and that aren't here to be puppeteered by anyone but the people that elected us to serve. I consider myself to be a public servant. For far too long, so many people are serving someone other than the public, including the Republicans in the Texas House. What we have seen time and time again. In fact, there was an amendment on the floor yesterday in which someone from the governor's office started to call Republicans and say, no, this is how you have to vote on this. That's not what you want. You want to send people to your capital who are going to represent what your interests are, not the interests of the governor. We have separation of powers for a reason, but there isn't one in the state of Texas right now. And so all they're trying to do is hold on to power. And let me tell you, one thing that we didn't talk about that I want you to understand that's a little different is that we are staying connected to those on the federal level, because we are losing certain battles here in the state of Texas. And our only option is on the federal level. So as Representative Reynolds laid out, we were standing shoulder to shoulder with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She fought for us on the federal level. And by gosh darn it, we're going to be fighting for her on the state level to make sure that her maps are the way that they need to be, to make sure that she goes back to Congress and she represents the constituency that has elected her time and time again, because that's what the people of Texas deserve. They deserve to have politicians that they choose and not the other way around. Politicians are spending too much time deciding who it is that they want to represent and handpicking them to the point that we've got all these ugly maps that I can't even describe, all the crazy shapes. The only shape everybody's talked about is the donut in Killeen. But we've got these terrible shapes all over the state because people want to pick who it is that they actually represent versus allowing the people to decide who it is that's going to represent them. And so I thank you. And let me tell you, it takes all of us in this fight. It can't just be me and Reynolds, right? We may be the talking heads, but I know that I didn't get here by myself. I know that I haven't been able to fight for progressive legislation, such as no-knock warrants, which was one of my main issues that I fought for, such as all the marijuana bills that I filed. I filed more than anybody else in this House without grassroots organizers that were willing to make sure that they came and testified, that were willing to spread the word. And it's the same thing with redistricting. They have played y'all and they don't want you to be a part of the process. But I encourage you, at least submit written testimony, because as of right now, you really don't have an opportunity to actually testify orally anymore on any of these maps. But submit that written testimony so that when we do go to court, your voice is heard. It most likely will be ignored in the House, but we'll make sure that the courts hear your words and understand who you are and what your community looks like.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And we need to send more progressive representatives to the Texas House to help and back both of you and the other colleagues of yours that are doing this work. Representative Reynolds, can I get your take? What does the next decade of progressive power building in Texas look like?
Well, Representative Crockett stole most of my thunder. I might have to go first next time because she got everything out. And if I just said the same thing, she already said that. So to save us time, I second everything she stated. But also I want to remind people that democracy resides in the power of the people. Unlike other countries that are ran by dictators, you know, where they don't have a chance to participate in their democracy. America is the land of the free. And even though those freedoms are trying to be taken away right now, that is why we continue to fight. That is why it's so important for you to make your voices heard at the local level, so that you want to have a district attorney that is fair, then guess what? You have to go vote. If you want to have a police chief that does not racially profile, guess what? You need to have a good mayor and city council, because that's where your police chief is hired from, right? If you want to have making sure that you have judges that are fair and balanced, you need to vote for judges at the county and district court level so that you have more diversity on the bench. And the only thing black is not the robe that they wear when they enter the courtroom. And that is why it's so important, if you care about a woman's right to choose, that you elect people that believe that women should be able to control and make decisions with their doctor as it concerns their bodies. So that is why it's so important. If you care about common sense gun reforms, and you care about common sense background checks and red flag laws that you articulated earlier, it's important that you vote your values. So elections matter. You can't complain about it if you're not participating. You know, it's one thing to play an armchair quarterback and you're talking about what you would have did if you were the quarterback, or how you would have caught that pass, that Hail Mary or whatever. That's make-believe. That's fantasy football. But you have a chance every election cycle to send someone home. You have the power to hire and fire. And we need to use that. Too many people died, Antonio, for the precious fundamental right that we have today to vote. Many of my ancestors, whose shoulders I stand on, they never dreamed that they would have the freedoms to elect black and brown people. But we do. We have that freedom. But if we're not careful, they will take us back to dark days. They want to bring back voter suppression. They want to take away many of the gains that we've made. So it's time for people to stand up, in the words of former Congressman John Lewis, and make some good and necessary trouble. That starts by voting. That starts by using your platform on social media and Twitter to engage other people so that they understand the value of their vote. So I'm so grateful for this platform. I'm so grateful that Progressive have a venue and an avenue so that we can articulate this in a way that we may not have been in the past. And we're going to continue to elevate this voice to let people know that they have a choice, and that Texas is not necessarily the conservative state that they always talk about it. It's a non-voting state. Texas is purple right now, and it could be blue if more Black and brown people came together to vote. Again, 95% of the growth has been Black and brown people that have been marginalized in the past. And I guarantee you that that Governor Abbott doesn't represent the values that we share together. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Attorney General Paxton, they don't represent those values. The majority of our Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate, they're trying to take away many of the rights that we're fighting so hard for each and every day. So that's why Antonia, we need people to vote their values. And that is the only way we're going to change this state. But now you have a progressive caucus that is going to be on the front line, leading the charge, and we need to work together as a community and share our common values.
And
Thank
you know, Reynolds, Representative Reynolds, the founding members of the Progressive Congressional Caucus were Bernie Sanders and freshman Maxine Waters. So I think that we have some big shoes to fill here in Texas. And I'm excited. Thank you all for joining me. And I want our viewers to take a look at this. Representative Reynolds, Representative Crockett, and myself. This is what Texas looks like. It's brown, Black, and progressive. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.